Very good. Did we lose him? Oh, no. All right, he'll get here. All right. Well, thank everybody for coming out. And first, before we kick this off, I know there was a 4-year-old boy who went missing at Jean Lafitte National Park yesterday. It's a federal park, but Sheriff Lapinto, the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office, has taken point on it, and I'm sure Sheriff Lapinto will talk about that more later. But our prayers go out to that family, and we wish the search party well as they're in the middle of trying to find the 4-year-old boy out there at Jean Lafitte. So I appreciate the work that Sheriff Lapinto is doing to help assist in that. I had asked these sheriffs from around the region to get together. Obviously, around the country, we're seeing an alarming increase in crime. In many cities, we're seeing large spikes in crime, especially violent crime. You're also seeing increased difficulties getting people to sign up for law enforcement. There's larger numbers of people retiring from law enforcement, and I've seen morale in some areas very low. Clearly, you've seen some of these efforts to defund the police that I strongly object to, that have had an impact. But being a police officer is a tough job. It's a tough job in good times. But even in days like today, we've never needed the men and women who put their lives on the line to keep our community safe more than we do now. And so I first want to start off by thanking the sheriffs and the men and women in uniform who risk their lives to keep our community safe, because it's important that they know we have their back. It's what makes our community stronger, knowing that if something goes wrong, we can call on law enforcement. I've said this many times. I would not be alive today if it wasn't for the bravery and heroism of police officers who saved me and so many other members of Congress that day on the ball field 4 years ago. And so I know the sacrifices that they make. But they're also dealing with a lot of challenges. And so we talked about some of those today. We talked about some of the things that are happening on the ground and how we at the federal level can be helpful. And also things that are moving through Congress that we need to make sure are keeping an eye on what we can do to help law enforcement be successful while not undermining the things that law enforcement need to do to keep our community safe. So with that, I know we're gonna open it up to questions, but I wanted to have each of the sheriffs that would like to say a few words share their thoughts too, and then we'll be happy to open it up. Start here, Sheriff Lapinto. Thank you for hosting us, and if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Thank you, Congressman, for allowing me to host it. Last week he asked us to host it here at the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office, getting our colleagues together. Normally we work on a regular basis together on individual cases, but really talking about national issues and what we can do in order to try to improve some of the situation, whether it's hiring, whether it's the amount of rest and the prisoner issues that we deal with on a regular basis, and how that is affected in Congress. We all have different jobs. I have a little bit of a different aspect, being a former legislator in the State House, but understanding that laws do make a difference, and our job is to go out and enforce the laws that are passed, and for them to be able to hear what our concerns are when they're passing those laws, to understand what the reality is and what's going to actually happen because of it. We're always trying to live in this this country, and be safe and have to deal with it, but unfortunately we'll have people that want to take those freedoms away from us, and that's where law enforcement comes in, and happy to get all of us together in the same room and try to discuss some of those issues.
I just want to thank Congressman Scalise also. Nowadays, law enforcement is tough, so we appreciate you and your support. We need it in these trying times, so thank you.
Thank you again, Congressman. But we shouldn't be surprised what we're seeing, an uptick in crime across our country. There's many reasons that's driving the uptick in crime. And let's just talk about the rhetoric that's going across the country right now about cops. Every day it seems like law enforcement's getting kicked in the balls, every single day. And that really, depreciates exactly what we're out there doing, fighting crime, right? So what should we be doing? If people see a spike in crime, so what are they going to do? They're going to go out and they're going to go buy guns. And they're going to keep their guns in their car. And the bad guys, who we just think are juveniles committing a simple burglary of a car, is arming themselves, right? So they become an armed criminal. It's not the same kid that you was just dealing with days earlier when he's breaking into cars. He becomes an armed criminal. And it's going to escalate to what? Carjackings, murders, and we don't want to hold the juveniles accountable. We got to remember that law enforcement is still the good guys. The bad guys are no longer the victims. They are bad guys. And who gets lost in all this? The victims. We just heard a story from Sheriff Guzman about a lady that he knows that was carjacked. And she had a nice vehicle, and the bad guy crashed the car. He wasn't even able to get it too far out the driveway before he had to exit and jump back in the car and make good of his escape. So unless we're going to change the rhetoric that's going around the country right now and getting behind law enforcement, and we're going to continue to see an uptick in crime unless we change that narrative. We got to change that narrative. We got to hold these juveniles and these young adult criminals accountable. Now there's short-term solutions and there's long-term solutions. And the long-term solution is don't let these guys become these guys. But that's going to take years. But in the meantime, if we don't get behind law enforcement and get out there and hold the criminals, the real bad guys, accountable, we're going to continue to see an uptick in crime across this country. And I look out at the media, and y'all can help. Y'all can help. Y'all can tell the whole story sometimes. You can tell what law enforcement is up against every single day. We all talked about recruitment and retention of police officers. Well, what incentive you can offer someone to be a law enforcement officer today? More money? You're tampering with and want to take away qualified immunity? Just imagine our country without law enforcement. Because if we continue to go down this road, that's exactly what we're going to see. Our neighboring parishes are struggling. St. Bernard is struggling to get good guys on the job and continue to do a good job. All the problems that we have in law enforcement today, and it's got a little bit to do with criminal justice reform, but a lot to do with police reform, is the ability to do our job. We talked about programs that they try. Buyback programs with firearms is ridiculous. If you want to get guns off the street, you got to be proactive and you got to go after the bad guys and take those guns from them. They're not coming off the street any other way. But it's going to take proactive work. You got to get out there, and sometimes it's dirty. Sometimes it's not pretty. But if we don't do that and stay aggressive and catch the bad guys and hold them accountable, we're going to be in a bad way in this country. Thank you.
I'd have to agree with Sheriff Pohlman on those statements. But as law enforcement leaders, it's our responsibility today to make sure our men and women in law enforcement are well trained and properly equipped to protect them from harm, civil liability, and now, as you see across the nation, criminal liability. In the old days, we had made a mistake or had a problem out there. We were civilly responsible. Our departments, got the checkbook out, wrote a check, and it went away. Now they expect law enforcement, if they make a mistake, to be held criminally. So we're responsible to see that none of this happens to our men and women.
Thanks, and I want to echo and thank Congressman Scalise for coming here, listening, having a dialogue, and seeing what it takes to help law enforcement during these really difficult times. And Congressman Scalise has always been there. He's always been a voice and someone who we can talk to. So thanks a lot, Congressman.
Sheriff Randy Smith, St. Tammany Parish. I want to thank Congressman Scalise for his support of law enforcement here, not only in Louisiana, but throughout our country. And I know he will continue to fight for us as a whole. I also want to thank you for your support of our veterans, Congressman, as well. There is money available through the federal government, as we know, and those grants and funds that we know we want earmarked for equipment, for law enforcement, for correction, so we can keep the bad guys in jail, The cost of housing inmates continuously goes up, just like the cost of the living. So we need those funds to continue to operate, provide the equipment necessary and the technology for our guys to do their job safely and effectively. Thank you.
Well, again, thank all of the sheriffs for coming and for the feedback that they've given and the input they've given. And again, for the work that they and their men and women in uniform do to keep our community safe. With that, we'd be happy to take some questions.
I'll start. I know that there, especially in Orleans Parish, there has been some issues with recruitment. It sounds like just about everywhere there's been issues with recruitment and retention. Were there any hardcore solutions that were found today that you could say that right away, I mean, these are right away needs that right away would get people to come and to stay?
You know, when you talk to the sheriffs that are always having a challenge with recruitment, you know, right now you're seeing more of a dip in interest in people across the country. It's not just a Louisiana problem. You're seeing it in many other states too. And so I think, one, it is the morale issue. We've got to make sure that we're expressing our strong support for the men and women in uniform who keep our community safe. Look, if there's a dirty cop, every cop wants to get rid of dirty cops. But it's a question of recognizing that all of the others who are risking their lives, and it is a dangerous job. Some days much more dangerous even than others, but you don't know what's behind the door. When you're answering a call, when someone's making that call for 911, they want to make sure quickly some officer can get there to help keep their family safe. And so that's why it's important that we all have the backs of the law enforcement officers in our communities who are keeping us safe. And I think sometimes that gets lost, and just increasing morale, increasing the support for law enforcement. We talked about some other specific ideas. Could there be incentives to help recruit more law enforcement officers? You know, clearly those are things we would look at. But in general, I think it's just sending the message that we support the brave men and women who are out there risking their lives in our communities every day, and they're not hearing that enough right now.
Was there a specific area that you guys came together and identified today, maybe as a priority, that you might want to take back to Washington and get some help on the federal level with?
You know, if you look, and there's some good proposals that I've seen in Congress. One of them is to give more support in terms of federal dollars for things like body cameras. And you've seen, and I think there's been a pendulum swing within law enforcement across the country. In the early days, there was some skepticism about what that would do, but now I think most sheriffs, most police chiefs that you hear from across the country recognize the value of something like body cameras, because it gives them a response if somebody's accusing an officer of doing something they didn't do. In many cases, you see that video get out quickly, and it shows that the officer was doing their job properly. And so that does have a cost to it. And there are proposals in Washington that would put more money out there for things like that, because as I know Sheriff Lapinto and I have had this conversation a lot, when you have a larger department, there's a big cost to storing that data. And so we've talked about things that could be done at the federal level to help law enforcement to bulk up on the newer technology. All of the sheriffs talked to me about how they're using technology to solve crimes quicker, and it's amazing how technology has advanced to allow them to rapidly identify criminals in ways where it might have taken weeks or months, or just the case would have gone unsolved. And that technology is expensive too, and so you know, helping our local law enforcement on the ground is important. You know, with some of the early COVID money, it was very narrow in what it could be used for, but maybe if we can make that money more flexible, that's already out there, that's something that we're looking at as well.
I've got another one for you. We're in the middle of this federal investigation now into the state police, and Congressman, you can answer this, or any of the sheriffs can answer this question as well. You know, you've got a whole troop that's now under investigation. There's a lot of distrust of police in that area because of that. How do you restore the faith in officers whenever when you've got something like this that has dominated the headlines for the last few months? You
know, restoring faith comes with accountability. And you've got to have transparency and accountability. I remember having this conversation many times with Mark Morial. When Mark was mayor of New Orleans, and I know Marlon and I got to know each other when I was first in the state legislature, and I represent some of the city of New Orleans, when New Orleans was seeing a big surge in crime back then, and a lot of us remember the Louisiana Pizza Kitchen murders, and that was one of those turning points where the city of New Orleans really rose up. But there were problems internally with the NOPD that were going unrecognized, And to his credit, and Mayor Morial and I had some disagreements on policy, but we were very much in agreement on that. And I've commended him publicly many times for the position he took. He worked really hard. He went and found Richard Pennington to come in and clean up the problems that were existing within the department. And people were held accountable. People went to jail. And ultimately, you saw communities reestablish trust with police that was lost because there were problems that were not being addressed. I've seen this in other departments too. I've talked to some of my colleagues in Minnesota. The Minneapolis department had big problems before George Floyd, and they were not getting corrected. And so communities know innately if there's a culture of corruption in the department that's not being addressed. And so the best thing to do is to address it head on. And again, just like Mayor Morial did at the time, that did turn the department around. And so you can't hide from this. You gotta confront it and address it and get the community involved as you make those changes. And so, I think that the job that these sheriffs have done has been incredible at working with the community, because there's got to be a direct relationship between the police officers and the communities that they keep safe. And if that breaks down, then you see problems. So the best thing they can do is confront it head on and correct the problems.
Got one last question. We've been talking about funding, and you had mentioned before maybe some incentive programs to help with the retention rates, and we were talking about obviously how morale
And recruitment,
is.
yeah.
Yes, how morale is a big part of that, but also what about pay rates as well? Could you talk a little bit more about recruitment and incentives?
And ultimately, the day-to-day pay for police officers is a local issue. Each community, each of these sheriffs has a different pay scale. They have a different benefits package, because it's not just the paycheck, it's the benefits that go along with it that help different police forces recruit people. And so, that's not something that the federal government needs to be directly involved in, but if there's things like helping to pay for education, we've done that with other entities before. And again, where we can get creative, let's try to brainstorm. But I do think it starts with letting the good police officers across the country know that we have their backs. Because when they're doing their job right, even when they do everything right, something bad can happen. Because when they respond to a call, it's because something bad already did happen that they then have to go and respond to. And if they do their job right, they need to know we have their back. And in many communities, they don't feel like people have their back. And I do think that's got to be something that we as a community take on. Well, thank you all. Appreciate you coming again. I appreciate what these sheriffs do, and especially what the brave men and women who put on that uniform and keep our community safe do every single day. Thank you very much.